Manhattan progressives adored it. Left-leaning record store owners and booksellers piled up the CDs and the tomes. The Glitterati showered it with 11 Tony Awards in its first year. It grossed more than $650 million from people who voluntarily shelled out their own cash. And now, Hamilton, the cheesy glorification of one of the most corrupt and disreputable founding era figures, just received what might be its most troublingly fitting award ever. It just got $30 million in COVID bailout money. Oh, what's that you say? You never want to see a production of that play? Well, you're paying for it anyway. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV, and the story comes to us via the New York Times and writer Michael Paulson, who tells us that despite the musical playing to packed houses since it debuted in 2015, despite making $650 million and being seen by 2.6 million people, the Hamilton Broadway production and 2 of its 4 touring shows just heard that they'll get your hard-earned cash. And there soon could be even more handed to them. Quote, as of this week, Hamilton has been approved for $10 million each for the Broadway production and 2 touring productions. It is not yet heard about the other 2 tours, end quote. That's $30 million thanks to the bureaucratic and highly unconstitutional Small Business Administration, otherwise known as the SBA, otherwise known as many other colorful terms which I very rarely use and won't use in this video. And it all started, well, kind of all started. It goes even further back than this, but it all seemed to start in April, when the SBA laid out details of how it will magically turn your cash into theatrical pork. Quote, the rollout of the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Initiative, a $16 billion federal aid program designed to help get cultural organizations back on their feet after the pandemic forced many to close. Really, was it the pandemic or was it politicians? Anyway, continuing, has been plagued by delays and confusion, but the Small Business Administration, which is administering the program, has begun announcing grant recipients, and there are indications that Broadway and its affiliated businesses could fare well. Yay! Whoa! And there is a fly. I'm gonna have to stop. And yeah, that $30 million for Hamilton isn't necessarily the end. The SBA might offer a curtain call of $20 million more because, of course, your decisions about what to do with your money aren't as important as the Washington, D.C. politicians' choices and the decisions of the SBA. Oh, what's that you say? Oh, you didn't want to go to Hamilton. You don't want it to get your money, and the Constitution doesn't grant the feds any power to hand the production your cash or even employ bureaucrats at the SBA to keep cooking at this giant pork fest? Well, too bad. And strangely, that is perfectly fitting, since Alexander Hamilton himself was the originator of American pork handouts to benefit his pals. And since Hamilton was the central proponent of the slimy practice of finding so-called implied powers in the strict wording of their Constitution. Oh, by the way, it was Hamilton who convinced George Washington to engage in one of the most egregiously pernicious actions of his life, the unconstitutional use of a military bigger than the Army of the Potomac to march on Western Pennsylvania whiskey makers in order to collect excise taxes, a collection process Hamilton and his cronies holding Revolutionary War bonds wanted so that they could profit mightily on the bonds that they bought for pennies prior to the adoption of the Constitution. As economist Thomas DiLorenzo observed in 2008, quote, when Hamilton engineered the nationalization of the state's debt as Treasury Secretary, something that was totally unnecessary since many states like Virginia had nearly paid off their war debts, the plan was to cash out much of the old debt at face value. This immediately became public knowledge in New York City, but the news spread ever so slowly to the rest of the country. Consequently, Hamilton's friends and supporters from New York City and New England went on a mad scramble down the eastern seaboard, purchasing bonds from hapless war veterans who had been paid in bonds for as little as 2% of par value. Huge fortunes were made by these slick New York speculators. Robert Morris pocketed a nifty $18 million. John Quincy Adams wrote to his father that the wealthiest Federalist lawyer in Massachusetts made a huge fortune with this caper. Hamilton participated in this parade of plunder himself, but claimed that the profits he made were for his brother-in-law. And as DiLorenzo notes for the Mises Institute, quote, Hamiltonian mercantilism is essentially the economic and political system that Americans have lived under for several generations now. A king-like president who rules through executive orders and disregards any and all constitutional constraints on his powers. State governments that are mere puppets of the central government. Corporate welfare run amok. All of which brings us back to the contemporary U.S. superstate, the diseased scion Hamilton helped create, the machine of perpetual predation that now is handing $30 million to the makers of a musical glorification of the man who started U.S. pork in what he called internal improvement programs. And Hamilton the play is not alone in this wonderful tradition now. Writes the New York Times' Paulson, quote, as of Monday, the administration said that among the entities getting $10 million, which is the maximum available for a single grant, were 2 Broadway landlords. The Nederlander organization, which controls 9 Broadway theaters, one of which houses Hamilton, and Jujamissen Theaters, which controls 5, as well as the Roundabout Theater Company, a nonprofit that runs 3 Broadway houses. David Byrne's Broadway show, American Utopia, was also among those getting $10 million. Incredible and insulting, but par for the course. The unconstitutional course laid out by Alexander Hamilton himself over 200 years ago. Well, it's frustrating, but it is a learning opportunity. I hope you enjoyed this exploration into history and what's happening today. And I hope you'll spread the video to your friends as well. Hey, don't forget everybody, if you want to find us, you can always find the entire MRC TV team at MRCTV.org. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Parler, and the videos are housed at Rumble. Go to shop.mrc.org for great Media Research Center items, and I'll be seeing you in the comments section on YouTube. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.